Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today's topic comes to us from commenter Joe Dem Elfie, who requested a video about notable characters left out of the movies and how they impacted the story. I've already done videos about some of the more notable characters left out of the films. Glorfindel, Tom Bombadil, Imrahil, Baragond, Gonbarigon, Gildor, and the Grey Company. But there is an overlooked character that has quite a part to play in the books. And that's who we're going to talk about today. Of course, I'm talking about Fredegar Bolger, the Fifth Hobbit. When we talk about the hobbits in the Fellowship, of course, we're talking about Merry, Pippin, Frodo, and Sam. But Fredegar was this close to being at the Council of Elrond, and thus, perhaps being in the Fellowship. And he aided the quest in some very important ways. We're not going to body shame the guy, but he was known as Fatty Bolger to his friends. Considering most hobbits are less than svelte, that seems like a pretty harsh nickname. And while he does not appear in the films, Bilbo does mention the Bolgers at his birthday party. And we see a quick cut to a table of appreciative hobbits. Since Fredegar was at Bilbo's party, you could say he was probably at that table. The lines from the book are very similar to the lines from the movie. "My dear Bagginses and Buffins," he began again. "And my dear Tooks and Brandybucks, and Grubbs and Chubbs and Burrowses and Hornblowers and Bolgers, Bracegirdles, Goodbodies, Brockhouses, and Proudfoots." "Proud feet," shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, and well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table. So that is the family of which Fredegar is a part, the Bolgers. And in fact, Merry eventually marries Fredegar's sister. One of the differences between the films and the books is the compression of time. In the books, the gap between when Bilbo leaves the Shire and when Frodo leaves the Shire is 17 years. The films make that time gap seem much shorter. So during that 17 years, Frodo lives alone at Bag End, but he maintains a cadre of friends from his childhood. Some people were rather shocked, but Frodo kept up the custom of giving Bilbo's birthday party year after year until they got used to it. He said that he did not think Bilbo was dead. When they asked, "Where is he then?" he shrugged his shoulders. He lived alone, as Bilbo had done. But he had a good many friends, especially among the younger hobbits, mostly descendants of the old Took, who had as children been fond of Bilbo and often in and out of Bag End. Folco Buffin and Fredegar Bolger were two of these, but his closest friends were Peregrine Took, usually called Pippin, and Merry Brandybuck. His real name was Meriadoc, but that was seldom remembered. So there we see the first mention of Fredegar Bolger, one of Frodo's good friends. Through the years, Gandalf occasionally makes brief visits, checking in with Frodo. At this time, Gandalf strongly suspects that Frodo has the One Ring. And I think his visits are to see the ring's effects on Frodo's health and aging. Part of his research. In any case, eventually, 17 years after Bilbo's birthday party, Gandalf shows up for that awesome sequence where they put the ring in a fire, see the inscription, and learn once and for all that the ring is the ring. It's decided that by Frodo's next birthday, Frodo and Sam should find a way to secretly leave the Shire and head for Rivendell. Of course, the next birthday would be September 22nd. Frodo and Bilbo share the same birth date, which is also shared, in fact, by my buddy Theron, the guy who I do the Lord of the Rings movie recaps with. The plan is to sell Bag End and pretend to be moving east across the Brandywine River to a house in Crickhollow, which also happens to be very near the border of the Old Forest. Peter Jackson obviously left the move to Crickhollow out of the films. Time passes, Frodo's birthday is fast approaching, and Frodo still hasn't left the Shire. At first Frodo was a good deal disturbed, and wondered often what Gandalf could have heard. But his uneasiness wore off, and in the fine weather he forgot his troubles for a while. Autumn was well under way before Frodo began to worry about Gandalf again. September was passing, and there was still no news of him. The birthday and the removal drew nearer, and still he did not come or send word. Bag End began to be busy. Some of Frodo's friends came to stay and help him with the packing. There was Fredegar Bolger and Falco Boffin, and of course his special friends, Pippin Took and Merry Brandybuck. Between them, they turned the whole place upside down. So the time has come to enact this fake move from Bag End to Crickhollow. Fredegar has shown up to help him pack. Keep in mind, Frodo thinks that only he and Sam know the truth, and that once he gets to Crickhollow, he and Sam are going to quietly take off. On September 20th, 2 covered carts went off laden to Buckland, conveying the furniture and goods that Frodo had not sold to his new home by way of the Brandywine Bridge. The next day, Frodo became really anxious and kept a constant lookout for Gandalf. Thursday, his birthday morning, dawned as fair and clear as it had long ago for Bilbo's great party. Still, Gandalf did not appear. In the evening, Frodo gave his farewell feast. It was quite small, just a dinner for himself and his 4 helpers. But he was troubled and felt in no mood for it. The thought that he would so soon have to part with his young friends weighed on his heart. He wondered how he would break it to them. The 4 younger hobbits were, however, in high spirits, and the party soon became very cheerful in spite of Gandalf's absence. The dining room was bare except for a table and chairs, and the food was good, and there was good wine. Frodo's wine had not been included in the sale to the Sackville Bagginses. When they had sung many songs and talked of many things they had done together, they toasted Bilbo's birthday, and they drank his health and Frodo's together according to Frodo's custom. Then they went out for a sniff of air and glimpse of the stars, and then they went to bed. Frodo's party was over, and Gandalf had not come. The next morning they were busy packing another cart with the remainder of the luggage. Merry took charge of this, and drove off with Fatty, that is, Fredegar Bolger. "Someone must get there and warm the house before you arrive," said Merry. "Well, see you later, the day after tomorrow, if you don't go to sleep on the way." So we see Fredegar described as Fatty. Poor guy. Frodo's birthday has now passed, and he's feeling the urgency of the situation. And Merry and Fredegar go on ahead to Crickhollow to prepare the house for Frodo's arrival. Flash forward a bit. Merry has gone to Crickhollow, left Fredegar there to tidy up, and returned to find Frodo on the road to help accompany him the rest of the way. And much like the film, they have an encounter with a Black Rider at the Brandywine River. "Look back, Mr. Frodo. Do you see anything?" On the far stage, under the distant lamps, they could just make out a figure. It looked like a dark black bundle left behind, but as they looked, it seemed to move and sway this way and that, as if searching the ground. It then crawled or went crouching back into the gloom beyond the lamps. "What in the Shire is that?" exclaimed Merry. "Something that is following us," said Frodo. "But don't ask any more now. Let's get away at once." They hurried up the path to the top of the bank, and when they looked back, the far shore was shrouded in mist, and nothing could be seen. "Thank goodness you don't keep any boats on the west bank," said Frodo. "Can horses cross the river?" "They can go 10 miles north to Brandywine Bridge. Or they might swim," answered Merry. "Though I never heard of any horse swimming the Brandywine. But what have horses to do with it?" "I'll tell you later. Let's get indoors, and then we can talk." "All right, you and Pippin know your way, so I'll just ride on and tell Fatty Bolger that you're coming. We'll see about supper and things." "We had our supper early with Farmer Maggot," said Frodo, "but we could do with another." "You shall have it. Give me that basket," said Merry, and rode ahead into the darkness. So the Black Riders are about. Frodo is nearing Crickhollow, and Merry rides once again ahead in order to help Fredegar prepare dinner for the gang. And at last, Frodo arrives at his destination. As they walked up the green path from the gate, no light was visible. The windows were dark and shuttered. Frodo knocked on the door, and Fatty Bolger opened it. A friendly light streamed out. They slipped in quickly and shut themselves in the light inside. They were in a wide hall with doors on either side. In front of them a passage ran back down the middle of the house. "Well, what do you think of it?" asked Mary, coming up the passage. "We've done our best in a short time to make it look like home. After all, Fatty and I only got here with the last cartload yesterday." Frodo looked round. It did look like home. Many of his own favorite things, or Bilbo's things, they reminded him sharply of him in their new setting, were arranged as nearly as possible as they had been at Bag End. So we see that Fredegar took the time to arrange the new place to look as much like Bag End as possible, which is a really nice gesture, from a friend. And we see another nice gesture. Fredegar and Mary prepare a feast. Mary and Fatty went into the kitchen on the other side of the passage and busied themselves with the final preparations for a late supper. Snatches of competing songs came from the bathroom, mixed with the sound of splashing and wallowing. They had supper in the kitchen on a table near the fire. "I suppose you three won't want mushrooms again," said Fredegar without much hope. "Yes, we shall," cried Pippin. "They're mine," said Frodo, "given to me by Mrs. Maggot, a queen among farmers' wives. Take your greedy hands away, and I'll serve them." Hobbits have a passion for mushrooms, surpassing even the greediest likings of big people. On this occasion, there was plenty for all, even according to Hobbit standards. There were also many other things to follow, and when they had finished, even Fatty Bolger heaved a sigh of content. They pushed back the table and drew chairs round the fire. So it's a giant meal, and we learn the important fact that hobbits have a passion for mushrooms. But now, dinner is finished. Frodo is about to get a surprise. "Well," said Frodo at last, sitting up and straightening his back as if he'd made a decision, "I can't keep it dark any longer. I've got something to tell you all, but I don't know quite how to begin." "I think I could help you," said Mary quietly, "by telling you some of it myself." "What do you mean?" said Frodo, looking at him anxiously. "Just this, my dear old Frodo. You are miserable because you don't know how to say goodbye. You meant to leave the Shire, of course, but danger has come on you sooner than you expected, and now you're making up your mind to go at once. And you don't want to. We are very sorry for you." Frodo opened his mouth and shut it again. His look of surprise was so comical that they laughed. "Dear old Frodo," said Pippin, "did you really think you had thrown dust in all our eyes? You've not been very careful or clever enough for that. You've obviously been planning to go and saying farewell to all your haunts all this year since April. We've constantly heard you muttering, 'Shall I ever look down into that valley again, I wonder?' and things like that. And pretending that you've come to the end of your money and actually selling your beloved Bag End to those Sackville Bagginses? And all those close talks with Gandalf?" "Good heavens," said Frodo. "I thought I had been both careful and clever. I don't know what Gandalf would say. Is all the Shire discussing my departure, then?" "Oh, no," said Mary. "Don't worry about that. The secret won't keep for long, of course, but at present it is, I think, only known to us conspirators. After all, you must remember that we know you well, and are often with you. We can usually guess what you're thinking. I knew Bilbo, too. To tell you the truth, I've been watching you rather closely ever since he left. I thought you would go after him sooner or later." And here we have the conspirators insist on going with Frodo. "My dear and most beloved hobbits," said Frodo, deeply moved, "but I could not allow it. I decided that long ago, too. You speak of danger, but you do not understand. This is no treasure hunt, no there and back again journey. I'm flying from deadly peril into deadly peril." "Of course we understand," said Mary firmly. "That is why we've decided to come. We know the ring is no laughing matter, but we're going to do our best to help you against the enemy." "The ring?" said Frodo, now completely amazed. "Yes, the ring," said Mary. My dear old Hobbit, you don't allow for the inquisitiveness of friends. I've known about the existence of the ring for years. Before Bilbo went away, in fact. But since he obviously regarded it as secret, I kept the knowledge in my head. Until we formed our conspiracy. I did not know Bilbo, of course, as well as I know you. I was too young, and he was also more careful. But he was not careful enough. So we see that the conspirators, Fredegar Bolger included, know about the ring. They may not know that it's the one ring, but they know it's important. And we learn that Merry once saw Bilbo use it to avoid Lobelia Sackville Baggins. And Merry even got a brief look at Bilbo's writings. And as they decide how to proceed, we get a revealing conversation between Fredegar and Frodo. Frodo sat for a while in thought. "I've made up my mind," he said finally. "I'm starting tomorrow, as soon as it is light. But I'm not going by road. It would be safer to wait here than that. If I go through the North Gate, my departure from Buckland will be known at once, instead of being secret for several days at least, as it might be. And what is more, the bridge and the East Road near the borders will certainly be watched, whether any rider gets into Buckland or not. We don't know how many there are, but there are at least 2, and possibly more. The only thing to do is to go off in a quite unexpected direction." "But that can only mean going into the Old Forest," said Fredegar, horrified. You can't be thinking of doing that. It's quite as dangerous as Black Riders." "Not quite," said Merry. "It sounds very desperate, but I believe Frodo's right. It's the only way of getting off without being followed at once. With luck, we might get a considerable start." "But you won't have any luck in the Old Forest," objected Fredegar. "No one ever has luck in there. You'll get lost. People don't go in there." "Oh, yes, they do," said Merry. "The Brandybucks go in, occasionally, when the fit takes them. We have a private entrance. Frodo went in once long ago. I've been in several times, usually in daylight, of course, when the trees are sleepy and fairly quiet." "Well, do as you think best," said Fredegar. "I am more afraid of the Old Forest than of anything I know about. The stories about it are a nightmare. But my vote hardly counts, as I am not going on the journey. Still, I'm very glad someone is stopping behind, who can tell Gandalf what you've done when he turns up, as I'm sure he will before long." Fond as he was of Frodo, Fatty Bolger had no desire to leave the Shire, nor to see what lay outside it. His family came from the East Farthing, from Budgeford and Bridgefields, in fact. But he'd never been over the Brandywine Bridge. His task, according to the original plans of the conspirators, was to stay behind and deal with inquisitive folk, and to keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crickhollow. He'd even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part might prove. "Excellent," said Frodo, when he understood the plan. "We could not have left any message behind for Gandalf otherwise. I don't know whether these riders can read or not, of course, but I should not have dared to risk a written message, in case they got in and searched the house. But if Fatty's willing to hold the fort, and I can be sure of Gandalf knowing the way we've gone, that decides me. I'm going into the Old Forest first thing tomorrow." "Well, that's that," said Pippin. "On the whole, I would rather have our job than Fatty's, waiting here till Black Riders come." "You wait till you're well inside the forest," said Fredegar. "You'll wish you were back here with me before this time tomorrow." So there's some great insight here. The plan is to have Fredegar stay at Crickhollow, give Gandalf the scoop if he comes by, pretend to be Frodo by wearing his clothes. Not sure how that's possible given his girth, but, throw on a vest. And draw the Black Riders to himself. That is a dangerous game. He's obviously not a fan of the Old Forest, but he's not going anyway. I like the notion that he can't bring himself to leave the Shire. He'd rather face the Black Riders than leave the Shire. And this is where Fredegar makes the choice that ultimately writes him out of the Fellowship. He could have gone with them to Rivendell, and as I mentioned, perhaps become the 10th member of the Fellowship. But leaving the Shire was too big an ask. Much like Sam's line in the film, "If I take one more step, it'll be the farthest from home I've ever been." all the hobbits are dealing with that issue of leaving their beloved Shire. But it seems like Fredegar, maybe more than the others, does not want to leave. And so, Fredegar says goodbye to his friends. Frodo woke suddenly. It was still dark in the room. Merry was standing there with a candle in one hand and banging on the door with the other. "It's time to get up. It's 4:30 and very foggy. Come on! Sam is already getting breakfast ready. Even Pippin is up. Wake that sluggard Fatty. At least he must get up and see us off." Soon after 6 o'clock, the 5 hobbits were ready to start. Fatty Bolger was still yawning. They stole quietly out of the house. After riding for about an hour, slowly and without talking, they saw the hedge looming suddenly ahead. It was tall and netted over with silver cobwebs. "How are you going to get through this?" asked Fredegar. "Follow me," said Merry, "and you'll see." He turned to the left along the hedge, and soon they came to a point where it bent inwards, running along the lip of a hollow. A cutting had been made at some distance from the hedge and went sloping gently down into the ground. It had walls of brick at the sides, which rose steadily, until suddenly they arched over and formed a tunnel that dived deep under the hedge and came out in the hollow on the other side. Here Fatty Bolger halted. "Goodbye, Frodo," he said. "I wish you were not going into the forest. I only hope you will not need rescuing before the day is out. But good luck to you, today and every day." "If there are no worse things ahead than the old forest, I shall be lucky," said Frodo. "Tell Gandalf to hurry along the east road. We shall soon be back on it and going as fast as we can." "Goodbye," they cried, and rode down the slope and disappeared from Fredegar's sight into the tunnel. Here we see the tunnel that was evidently made by the Brandybucks, leading under the hedge bordering the old forest. And we see the fortunes of the 5 friends diverge at this point. Fredegar plays his part well, and for a few days he distracts the Black Riders. Finally, they come for him, thinking he's Frodo. As they prepared for sleep in the inn at Bree, darkness lay on Buckland. A mist strayed in the dells along the riverbank. The house at Crickhollow stood silent. Fatty Bolger opened the door cautiously and peered out. A feeling of fear had been growing on him all day, and he was unable to rest or go to bed. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. Then he shut and locked the door. The night deepened. There came the soft sound of horses led with stealth along the lane. Outside the gate they stopped, and 3 black figures entered, like shades of night creeping across the ground. One went to the door, one to the corner of the house on either side, and there they stood, as still as the shadows of stones, while night went slowly on. The house and the quiet trees seemed to be waiting breathlessly. There was a faint stir in the leaves, and a cock crowed far away. The cold hour before dawn was passing. The figure by the door moved. In the dark, without moon or stars, a drawn blade gleamed, as if a chill light had been unsheathed. There was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. "Open in the name of Mordor," said a voice thin and menacing. At a second blow, the door yielded and fell back, and timbers burst, and lock broken. The black figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like fire on a hilltop. "Awake! Fear! Fire! Foes! Awake!" Fatty Bolger had not been idle. As soon as he saw the dark shapes creep from the garden, he knew that he must run for it or perish. And run he did, out the back door, through the garden, and over the fields. When he reached the nearest house more than a mile away, he collapsed on the doorstep. "No, no, no," he was crying. "No, not me. I haven't got it." It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last, they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, some strange invasion from the old forest, and then they lost no more time. "Awake! Awake! Far away, answering horns were heard. The alarm was spreading. The black figures fled from the house. One of them let fall a hobbit cloak on the step as he ran. In the lane, the noise of hooves broke out, and gathering to a gallop went hammering away into the darkness. All about Crickhollow there was a sound of horns blowing, and voices crying, and feet running. But the black riders rode like a gale to the north gate. Let the little people blow. Sauron would deal with them later. Meanwhile, they had another errand. They knew now that the house was empty, and the ring had gone. They rode down the guards at the gate and vanished from the Shire. Well done, Fredegar. He played his part, managed to keep his cool just long enough to survive and rouse the village, running a mile in the process. The line where he's babbling, "No, not me, I haven't got it," I think is Fredegar imagining being tortured by the Black Riders for information about the ring, much like Gollum was. So mission accomplished for Fredegar. Of course, the Black Riders then take off for Bree, and that's where we pick up with the rest of the story. And you think that's the last we hear of Fredegar, but no. Near the end of the Return of the King, after the Battle of Bywater and the Shire has been liberated from Saruman's clutches, Frodo goes to the cells where Saruman had imprisoned rebellious locals, and one of those prisoners is Fredegar Bolger. The day after the battle, Frodo rode to Mishal Delving and released the prisoners from the lockholes. One of the first that they found was poor Fredegar Bolger, fatty no longer. He had been taken when the ruffians smoked out a band of rebels that he led from their hidings up in the Brockenbors. "You would have done better to come with us after all, poor old Fredegar," said Pippin as they carried him out, too weak to walk. He opened an eye and tried gallantly to smile. "Who is this young giant with the loud voice?" he whispered. "Not little Pippin. What's your size in hats now?" So we see that Fredegar has been starving in prison. He may get a new nickname after this. And Pippin brings back the line from all those months before, saying, "You'd have done better to come with us after all." And despite his imprisonment and likely PTSD, the last line we hear from Fredegar is a joke about Pippin's hat size. It says something about his character and ability to cope. So there you have it. Fredegar Bolger, the fifth Hobbit, trusted friend of heroes Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, kept the secret of the ring hidden, volunteered to pretend to be Frodo as bait for the Black Riders, was chased by the Black Riders, led a group of rebels against Saruman, was imprisoned for that rebellion. I mean, this guy led an adventurous life. I've seen him referred to as the Pete Best of the Hobbits, which is hilarious. Pete Best obviously was the fifth Beatle who missed out on all the fame and fortune of the Beatles, much like Fredegar missed out on all the fame and fortune of his fellow hobbits. But there's an interesting connection to that line because the Beatles actually attempted to make their own Lord of the Rings movie. They were going to use original music. They went to Tolkien. Tolkien turned them down. But they also went to Stanley Kubrick to direct. He also turned them down. But this was a serious attempt to make the Lord of the Rings with the Beatles. Paul was going to be Frodo. Ringo was going to be Sam. George was going to be Gandalf. And John Lennon was going to be Gollum. And if Pete Best had been in that movie, he of course would have played Fredegar Bolger, the fifth Hobbit. There you go, everybody. Thank you so much for that suggestion, Joe Dem Elfie. If you out there have a topic you'd like me to talk about, feel free to put it in the comments. Love to do a video about a topic of your choosing. Thanks so much, everybody. Talk to you next time.